Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am one of your hosts, Sunny Chen. Thank you so much to Dr. Leslie Joseph for allowing me to share my findings, and thank you for joining me. Since the early 20th century, plastic has been around and has dominated U.S. consumerism. Unfortunately, it hurts the planet in all phases of its life cycle, from when it's produced, emitting greenhouse gases, to when it's used, releasing microplastics, to when it's discarded, rotting in landfills. That being said, everyone knows its negative impact on the environment, but frankly, nothing major has been done to reduce this planet-destroying product. So today, we are talking about plastic pollution, but specifically zeroing in on the last phase of its life and where it is discarded: developing nations. In this first episode, we will be discussing research that demonstrates the US's deep-rooted issue with plastic waste dumping. In the next episode, we will dive into the specific negative impacts of this dumping on developing nations. How much plastic waste does the US produce? Where does it end up? We need answers to these questions. So let's talk about it. Stay tuned. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening. On this episode, we are talking about waste colonialism, or the disposal of hazardous waste by high GDP countries into low GDP countries. And the main question is, why is the US a focal point of this issue? Well, I have some shocking statistics for you. But before that, let me quickly read you the title of the article of said statistics. Published in the National Geographic in 2021, Melissa Golden wrote, U.S. generates more plastic trash than any other nation, report finds. What does the report find? 1. The U.S. produces 46 million tons of plastic waste in 2016, 17% of all plastic waste. 2. The U.S. has a 30-year history of shipping half of its recyclable plastic overseas, primarily to China and other developing nations lacking the infrastructure to manage it. And 3. 3.91 million metric tons of plastic collected in the United States were shipped abroad. First, the US produced 46 million tons of plastic waste in 2016, 17% of all plastic waste. 46 million tons of plastic waste. Sounds large, right? Unfortunately, it's probably even larger than you may have initially thought. Don't worry, I was speechless when I realized this too. So, most of us don't have a good idea of how much 46 million tons is. Hopefully, this analogy can clear this up a bit. Every one of us eats food. It is one of the biggest necessities of life. So you would think we produce a lot more food waste than plastic waste, right? Since, well, we eat every day. The US produces 80 million tons of food waste annually. Compared to 46 million tons of plastic waste, it's not much more. Isn't that crazy? Well, it's not crazy in the sense that it's understandable how this number got so high. For example, when you go to the grocery store, almost everything is packaged in plastic. From the plastic bags that you put produce in, to the packaging for bakery items and meat products, to drink bottles, etc., plastic is everywhere. On every shelf, and in every shopping cart. That being said, plastic is cheap and convenient. The whole point of businesses, well, I shouldn't say the whole point, but you get what I mean, is to decrease costs and increase profits. When you have plastic available that is cheap to manufacture, light and easy to transport, and can hold almost anything, why wouldn't a company not use plastic? Why would a company not use plastic? Thus, the 46 million tons is a pretty good reflection of the US's reliance on plastic. That number does not show that enough. Remember the 17% of all plastic waste statistic. In almost 200 countries, the US produces almost a fifth of all plastic waste. Second, the US has a 30-year history of shipping half of its recyclable waste overseas, primarily to China and other developing nations, lacking the infrastructure to manage it. I was debating whether or not to say recyclable in the shipping half of its recyclable plastic overseas part. Not because I wanted to hide anything, I just think it's unnecessary. Why? Because the countries that are receiving the plastic waste don't even have the infrastructure to even recycle it. Isn't that ironic? It's like me giving my math homework to a 5-year-old and saying it's easy. They don't even know how to do, the math that I'm doing. In the next episode, I'll talk more about what happens to that plastic, since it's obviously not recycled. Third, 3.91 million metric tons of plastic collected in the United States were shipped abroad. When I was researching, I kept on thinking, can't these countries just ban imports of recyclable plastic? Well, unfortunately, I wasn't the only one who thought of this generic solution, and it doesn't work. And spoiler alert, it doesn't work. Katie Brigham wrote an article in the CNBC in 2022 titled, "How the Fossil Fuel Industry is Pushing Plastic on the World." This is what she found. China used to profitably recycle much of the world's plastic, but stopped accepting plastic waste imports in 2018, since much of it was too contaminated to be repurposed. So now, the waste is being diverted to poorer nations that don't have the infrastructure to process or recycle it. Africa saw a fourfold increase in plastic waste imports in 2019, the year after China closed its doors. Plastic also flooded into India, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam, which have since implemented their own import restrictions. But the US is still sending its waste there anyways. All in all, nothing has been done to stop the US from dumping its waste in these developing countries. That's why a lot of waste statistics, like how much plastic waste was produced in the US, often underestimates the true number, since when it's shipped to other countries, it's technically not the US anymore. This is really detrimental to these developing nations. Imagine living next to a landfill or an incinerator that is just straight burning the plastic. We'll talk more about that in the next episode. So a quick recap. The US produces 46 million tons of plastic waste annually, and considering 80 million tons of food waste is produced, this number is quite large. Percentage-wise, the US boasts a 17% of all plastic waste in the world. It has a 30-year history of shipping said waste into developing nations, even if they ban imports. So what does this mean? A couple things come to mind. Obviously, it's really difficult, dare I say impossible, to completely ban plastic. I guess I can make it easier by saying single-use plastic that compromises the majority of plastic waste since it's disposed after one use. But any reduction is significant to reducing plastic waste being exported to other countries. Still, the root cause here is still that the US is dumping the waste into other countries, worsening waste colonialism. So hopefully in the future, legislation can be passed and consumer mindsets can shift to mitigate this pressing issue. There is still so much more that can be said about this. I've included several research studies in the description if you want to read more about it. Above all, we need to recognize that plastic is detrimental to the environment, and knowing that and responding accordingly can make a world of a difference. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.